This is Strictly Business, presented by the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce. Sponsored in part by the law offices of Young Wooldridge, San Joaquin Community Hospital.
Welcome back to Strictly Business. My name is Melissa Rostern. I'm filling in for Nathan Ollie today. Lawsuits can happen when you least expect them, and the outcome can impact more than just your business. Joining us now is Chris Hamilton with the law offices of Young Wooldridge to discuss some of the basics about limited liability entities to help you avoid personal liability for your business activities. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Good morning.
Good morning. Kind of bear with me. I'm kind of
No problem. It's a kind of tricky subject, so we'll get through it together.
That sounds good. So what kind of liability are we talking about here?
Well, really, I'm talking about liability that results from your business activities. It relates to claims that somebody may make against you individually in a situation where they may not be limited to just your business assets, but they can go after your personal assets, just something that we really want to avoid. The more obvious case would be where you have a sole proprietor who's operating a business, say a machine shop. You're providing services to people. The less obvious case, but which is no less important, is someone who, say, owns residential real property and they rent it out to someone. In either situation, whether you recognize it or not, you're operating a small business. And if you do it as a sole proprietor, meaning individually and not through some kind of limited liability, and somebody does make a claim and is successful, and say that claim is beyond whatever insurance you have, they can seek to satisfy that claim, not just out of your business assets, but out of your other personal assets. And so the idea here, the focus for me today is to discuss how when you operate this business through an entity, instead of having your personal assets subject to that, exposed to those claims, when you limit your liability, only those business assets will be subject to those claims. So anytime I have someone who is simply renting out real property as kind of a retirement objective, or just has a small business, I encourage them to stop doing it as a sole proprietor, assuming it's okay to do that, and form some kind of limited liability entity.
Okay, and that's definitely scary to think that they can come after not only your business assets, but also your home and your car and what other possessions you may have.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of times somebody comes to us after the claim has been made, and so really I'm here to try and to encourage people to be proactive.
And that's definitely the key. And I'm sure that the shocking result for many people who own real property, at least that property, does insurance play a role here?
Yeah, absolutely. Insurance is really your first line of defense anytime you're running a business. And I always encourage any business owner, whether they're going to maintain their business as a sole proprietorship or not, to consult with their insurance agent to make sure that they have the appropriate amount of coverage for the types of activities that they're engaging in. Ultimately, they want to make sure that they've got enough insurance. This is just a further step that goes beyond just the insurance and says we're also going to kind of compartmentalize your liability to only what's in the business.
Okay. And what types of entities do you recommend that small business owners use to protect their personal assets from their business activities?
Well, there are several options. I'll say that in recent years, I most often use a limited liability company, but certainly people are very familiar with corporations and partnerships, or really limited partnerships is the entity when I'm talking about a partnership that I'll be using.
Okay. And what are some of the general distinctions among these entities?
Well, I'll start with corporations because I think that's what most people are familiar with. Really, the distinctions among them all relate to how they're managed and how they're taxed at a very basic level. So in a corporation, you have shareholders who own the corporation. You have directors who are charged with really acting in the name of the corporation and governing the direction of the corporation. And then you have officers who are really charged with the day-to-day operation of the business. Due to this structure, there's a lot of overhead involved in its management. Typically in a situation where you have a sole proprietor, I'll have that sole proprietor transfer their assets to this corporation in exchange for stock. That's in almost every situation a tax-free event. Then that sole proprietor becomes a sole shareholder, sole director, sole officer. They still have to have annual meetings, and they have to have detailed notes of those meetings, and those would be those formalities that I was mentioning earlier. You also have to work very hard to make sure that your corporate assets, including your accounts and funds, are completely separate from your personal assets. We use the term commingling, and you don't ever want to commingle your
No,
personal
not
and
at
your
all.
business assets. The idea is, though, that if you follow these formalities and something happens, somebody's injured, and they do have a claim against you or your business, you're going to be, your personal assets are going to be out of the equation.
Okay. And then I know you kind of touched on corporations, but how are those entities taxed?
Corporations are generally taxed at the highest level because they're taxed twice. The corporation is taxed when the income is received by the corporation. Pardon me. And a second time when it's passed on to the shareholders, usually through a dividend. You can make what is called an S election to become an S corp. That has one layer of tax, and the way it works is instead of the income being taxed to the corporation when it comes in, the income is passed directly on to the shareholders, and it's taxed to them in proportion to their ownership of shares. The main issue with a corporation, in my opinion, that people run into is that they just have a lot of administrative overhead. They're less attractive for a smaller business because you may not need to have all of these corporate officers and directors, and you may not want this significant management structure.
Absolutely.
They tend to be suited towards situations where you know that you're going to need to generate a lot of revenue through investments. For various reasons that are beyond the scope of our discussion today, investors tend to prefer shares to membership interests in LLCs. They're also suited to businesses where there's already kind of a significant management structure. But outside of that, they can become kind of cumbersome to operate and observe the formalities that you need to observe to obtain that limited liability.
Okay. And what about partnerships as a small business entity?
Partnerships are an acceptable form, but in my opinion, they have drawbacks as far as limited liability. In a limited partnership, which is really the focus that I'm going to have here, you have one limited partner and at least one general partner, or at least one limited partner, pardon me, and a general partner. The limited partner is usually somebody who has contributed money or a part of a property, but they don't operate in or they don't participate in the operation of the business. Essentially, they're what we consider a silent partner. Then you have a general partner who is responsible for the management of the business. The primary issue with a limited partnership is that the general partner does not have limited liability. And so you're kind of faced with the situation where if you want to operate with a partnership or a limited partnership, you have to form another entity that is a limited liability entity to act as that general partner.
Oh, goodness.
So they're not bad by any means, but they will require more overhead in terms of costs of getting you in a position where you have the limited liability that you're looking for. The upside is that they're very easy to manage. You know, in a partnership, the general partner is the person who's managing the business on a daily basis. They don't, with exception of certain things specified in their operating agreement, they don't have to go to the limited partners and ask for permission. They get taxed as a pass-through entity. So instead of two layers of tax, you just have one layer of tax directly to the individuals who own it. And they actually have a unique feature which allows you to allocate income or gain or loss to the partners, not necessarily in accordance with their ownership interest, which is another really complex issue, which we won't get into. But the idea is that they can be very beneficial in certain situations where you have a unique business relationship that may make sense for that special allocation of gains or losses.
Okay. And what kind of relationships might be beneficial for that kind of partnership?
You mean what types of businesses? I would say generally, a limited liability partnership is suited towards, farming operations, owning land, any type of real property rental. I think that they're suitable. I just think that a limited liability company is probably a little bit easier to manage, and you don't have to form two entities, which is why I typically will go with a limited liability company over a partnership.
Okay. And what's the primary difference between a limited partnership and a limited liability company?
I'd say that the primary difference is the idea or this issue that we've just discussed, which is that in a limited partnership, you've got a general partner who doesn't have limited liability. So if you form one and you truly want limited liability, you need to form some other entity, usually a limited liability company, who will act as the general partner so that the general partner also has limited liability. It's just overhead. You can achieve almost the exact same thing with a limited liability company by simply having it managed by a manager as opposed to the members. The other, I suppose, advantage of a limited liability company as compared to the partnership is that you have a choice with a limited liability company to be taxed as a partnership and have those special allocations of income and gain and loss. Or you can be taxed as an S corporation, which has huge advantages potentially for somebody who provides services and is employed in their own business to avoid some self-employment taxes. But that's a little beyond,
A little beyond.
the already very dry topics that we're on today.
Yeah, but it's still important information that people do need to know about, and because lawsuits can pop up at any time, so it's always good to be prepared and kind of have the protections in place to protect not only your business but your personal assets as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And are there any other final comments that you'd like to make regarding protecting your assets through limited liability entities at all?
Well, I'd like to just make the important point that these are generalizations. When you're considering transferring your assets, or a major step like taking your personal business and forming a corporation, you really need to talk to a professional. There are a number of things beyond just the limited liability that you need to consider. Typically, those people are going to be your attorney and a certified public accountant because they need to understand your business model and your business goals in order to help you select the right entity. For example, if I have somebody who I know is looking to completely sell an entity that they've created, I'm probably going to put them in a corporation, even if it's more difficult initially because there may be huge tax advantages later selling that stock. So it's important to know your end goal so I can help you select, or somebody can help you select the entity that's suitable for your activity. They're going to help you identify the best tax advantage or at least have you operate your business in as much an optimal manner as possible from a tax perspective. The other issue is that when you operate your business through an entity, you have the opportunity to consider it in your estate plan, which means if it's a business that's going to survive and have value for your family or your heirs, it's a lot easier to allow that to happen seamlessly when you have an entity where the ownership can be transferred through a trust. You don't have to probate assets of the business. It just significantly simplifies the continued operation of your business.
And that's fantastic information. Thank you again for kind of coming on and talking about this. It's important information for our members to know when it comes to protecting their businesses and their personal assets from lawsuits. Thank you again for coming on. And
it was my pleasure. It's a very important, though not necessarily exciting topic, but I try and get it out there to help all of our sole proprietors out there who may be surprised to find out that they're personally liable for something that happened in their business.
Yeah, well, I learned some things today too, so that's always a good thing to learn better ways to protect your business from lawsuits. Okay. All right, coming up next is the closing bell. My name is Melissa Roster. Stay with Strictly Business. We'll be right back.